Welcome to our Product Product Leadership Series. This time we're with another alumni, Antonia, who also runs our Product Women's Circle. And we're going to talk about customer insight today. So Antonia is Senior PM in Product Ops at the Avia Group. Is that correct?
Aviv,
sorry, Aviv Group. So I was writing it down wrong. Let's jump into the first question, because there's always an interesting story here. How did you come to realize the importance of customer insight, like within product decision making?
So a little while ago, I worked at a company that was very heavily A/B test driven. So as far as customer insight was concerned, we all really had the feeling that we're doing this, we're really listening to the users, and we invested a lot of time into our A/B testing system. And we used to take bets on which variation would do well.
Yeah, cool.
And one time we tried some crazy ideas with our payment screen. So it was a mobile fitness app. And one variation for the payment screen was literally just a paragraph. And it said, this is what you get for this price, monthly or 3 months or whatever you want to renew it. And I was amazed. Our CEO, who had a strong product background, came up with this variation, and I was like, this is gonna blow everything else out of the park. So I was so super confident this was gonna work. And we put it live. So, I mean, first of all, it looked so simple, but it was actually quite difficult to pull off, as usual. But we put it live. And not only did it not perform astonishingly, it actually converted worse than what we had before. And that was just amazing, just how wrong somebody can be, and just how wrong I could be. And that was so super interesting, because even when you do A/B testing, right, you don't know what the reaction is going to be until you put it in front of people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. No, I mean, it's like, I think everybody needs to go through testing once, just to just hit your ego in the face. You go into, I've had it before, you go like, there's no way this cannot work. And then
exactly,
like nothing or negative. Yeah. I mean, it's a really good stat that, these are stats from top companies, so like Google, Bing, Amazon, Pinterest. All of those companies, I can't remember the exact stat per company, all of them put their experiment success rate between 5 to 15%, even 5 to 10%, i.e. 90 to 95% of experiments fail. And I think, you read that kind of thing, not, maybe for them, not for us. So you're actually seeing it in reality is just a good life lesson, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
About things. How did you find, running A/B tests? Talked about this with Marissa in this series. There's a lot of anti-patterns, right? It's actually quite risky. They need to be set up well. How much do you think that depended on like a very strong, so you said a very experienced CTO, like really understanding the nuances of A/B testing?
I mean, I think without that, you can run A/B tests, but considering how expensive it is to run them, just from engineering power and time as well, and data analysis, if you don't have this very, very solid base, there is basically no point. There are so many things to think about. You need to make sure that everything you want to track, you track, and you track it accurately. That there is, if you get bad data, then basically you wasted the entire 3 weeks on top of that 2 weeks of development.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's it's again, it's one of these things that's become a bit of like a fetishization, right? So let's A/B test everything.
Right.
Yes, it is really, it's a really good tool, but it needs to be in the right context. I think also there's,
Absolutely.
an anti-pattern that I see a lot is, the classic example, right, of A/B testing the color of a button, when if you're actually like an early stage product, or even a mature product where you haven't done the sort of validation work, you're just not going to be testing the right things. You're not testing enough of a variance for it to really move in any meaningful way.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's something that people don't really realize when it comes to A/B testing. A lot of the time, and it depends on the size of your user base, right? A lot of the time, you don't get anything statistically significant. Mm-hmm. And you may, if you're a small company, if you're a startup, you may need to run your tests for weeks before you actually see any conclusive evidence one way or another.
You don't have. And again, it's all of these questions, like if you set it up wrong, if you're just testing, just don't really, ultimately aren't answering like big strategic assumptions, then it can be a bit of a dead end. How, I think you're lucky to be in a position where you had the right architecture, the right expertise, the right experience as well. Since that role, how have you, there's the ideal world versus reality, right? And it's like, if you were, there's one, everything's set up perfectly. You can, you have agile teams that are autonomously making decisions about what to build next. Yeah. Reality is not like that. How do you be customer centric, right? Within the constraints of an imperfect company? What specific tactics do you apply?
I think really pushing for that user centricity is honestly one of the main hurdles in a product manager's job nowadays. I think especially in Europe, where there's relatively low product maturity in companies. In an ideal world, user research should be half your job. Yeah. A lot of the time, that half is taken up by advocating for being user-centric. And I think it's very difficult to really come up with a blueprint, because a lot of the time, there might be a long history of your company, or it might be more what I'd like to call ego-driven development. Yeah. When you have very strong founders, C-level, that they are very headstrong and they know exactly where they want to go. I think the half of it is trying to show people the value there is in it. Yeah. And that really depends on the type of person that you need to convince. So if what's important to your manager or to your CEO, CTO is the bottom line, then you need to find strategies to really show how much money you could be losing or how much better you could be doing. However, if it's, let's say, your manager has a really high focus on conversion, you can show exactly, if we find ways, if we spend, let's say, 2 weeks or even 4 weeks to raise conversion by X%, this is what will happen. So I think it's really about finding the right way to speak to the person you need to convince. Yeah. And I think the other half of that is just try and do it. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission a lot of the time. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be confrontational. If you're in a B2B setting, ask to sit in on some sales calls. Just say, I'm not going to interfere with your work. I'll be a fly on the wall. Yeah. And you'll already learn so much. Another thing that I've found is to actually harness the information that's already available in your company. If you have a customer success team, speak to them, because they have so many insights.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, really good points, I think. I think that framing the value based on, like, depending on who you're speaking to, really good advice. Yeah. Just go and do it. It's something really obviously close to home for us, as you know, for Product MBA. And, people come up with all sorts of excuses to just not pick up the phone or not send a message. And completely agree with, remember one of my first product roles, just realizing like there's these, customer support people. I didn't really know what they did apart from speak to customers. So I was like, customer support people, they spend all their day speaking to customers. Like, why are we not leveraging that info?
Yeah.
You speak
Absolutely.
to them, and it's in that case it was, they were junior, straight out of university. It's like, the implicit thing was that we can't trust their decision making. You speak to them, they're incredibly knowledgeable and well spoken about, and what's the word for it? Like, we're able to articulate the key user problems like really, really easily and accurately. So I completely agree with that as well. I'd be interested to know, because obviously you're one of our success stories, let's say, from Product MBA. Like, any lessons that you felt were valuable from the program in terms of like just, for example, getting out there and just doing it, or like how to actually leverage customer insight effectively?
I think what the Product MBA did for me was really hone my user interview skills.
Nice.
Yeah. And it's so important to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of asking somebody, for example, do you go to the gym? Yeah, I go to the gym. Okay. When was the last time you went to the gym? And you'll get a completely different answer.
Yeah.
And it's really
I'd be
thinking about how you phrase your questions.
Yeah.
It's so important.
It's really good to know, because I think that's the key, right? With using, when you do it a few times, you realize it's the digging in, and I wonder if that is a symptom. Of when people don't do it. I'm not sure it's a symptom of just lack of experience. I think actually it is that in many cases, as product people, we go in with quite a fixed idea of what we're going to be doing anyway. So for example, like we're going to harness all the information to simply like validate what we've already decided to do. That's a very common anti-pattern I see. And so I don't know, what do you think that's accurate? I'm just sort of thinking aloud. And again, we teach, and I think you see the value of it, right? Where you go in just actually very, just objectively, and you're just listening and you, where possible, anchoring what they're saying behavior, but generally just trying to go quite deep and open up, but go deep on some whatever topics come up.
Yeah, I think the way I phrase it for myself was just think of it as a conversation. Because my main goal was to sort of, as you say, like start very general, but then when there's something that sparks something or something that you think is interesting, you go, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
And I think we do definitely in product have a tendency to latch on to one solution, and it can totally color how we do interviews.
Well, because again, it depends on the organizational context you're in, and it's if you're being pushed like, hey, you need to come up with a plan next week,
right,
then you're going to jump to whatever solution comes to mind. You're not going to give yourself the sort of space to think that through, as objectively and detached as possible. So I mean that is a challenge. I think one really great piece of advice, which was Alex Mitchell, who's in this series as well. So he's director of product management, product management. He will say, okay, if you're to a product manager, if your team are going to work on X in Q2, right? Here's this sort of objective we're going to set then. So within Q1, please prioritize time to explore what might be, what you might do. So it's taking pressure, carving out time and saying this is important, like this user research, but also doing it in a way where it's like, you're going to have 3 months to move towards it. So you're sort of gradually evolving ideas in this sort of safe space, which I think is a really smart way to do it. Because, I think of myself as well, coming to the product MBA and the validation work, you inevitably put pressure on yourself and sort of try to move quickly with, you want to find the thing that's going to work really quickly.
Right. And
it's not helpful to put psychological pressure on yourself to find the thing. Because that's inevitably you're going to latch onto the wrong problem or the non-problem, for example. So
yeah, I think a lot of the
thing.
things in product management are a creative process, actually.
Yeah, 100%.
And we tend to deal with it as really more a managerial thing, right?
Yeah.
Like we need to get this, this, and this done by this and
Yeah.
this date. But in order to really be creative, you need that headspace.
100%. How do you have any specific sort of tactic? I think it's a really good topic because it's, you know, some of the book I published on product leadership is that you're not going to use customer insight effectively if you're coming at it from the wrong psychological state. You know, if you're stressed or you're already, you know, you're under pressure, like you're not going to be seeing the digging under the surface with things. So as a product manager, like, coming up with good ideas, you need some sort of creative process. Like, how do you approach that? Any specific tactics?
So regarding the creative process, honestly, I just give myself space. And I think that's super important. And for me, I know it's not been the same for everybody, but for me, really doing home office has helped a lot because I can set my own time. And if I'm, you know, if I think of something or I feel very focused at midnight, then I will work at midnight and get it out. And if I don't feel like that in the afternoon, then I'm not going to work. But that's also the kind of flexibility that you need to negotiate with your company a lot of the time.
Yeah, but I think that's, it's really, it's a big topic, but I think so important is like just being clear on like why you do things in certain ways. So I've you know, rules that I've followed before is like, let's, you know, no meetings the first 3 hours of the day. Clear on why and saying like, we're, you know, focusing on deep work, right? The more strategic work, people get that. And I think again, communicating, saying like, hey, I'm using, you know, this time in the afternoon to like go to the gym at 3 p.m. or whatever. So like that is part of my work process, and here's why, and like here's how I have used that to deliver results before, for example. So I think it's about negotiating and just showing like what, you know, as with using customer insight, like what is the value of this?
Exactly.
Yeah. But I think also, as you said, you know, coming back to one of the points earlier, like just go and do it, right? I think it's easy to worry about, you know, my boss thinks I'm lazy if I'm
absolutely.
But do it, explain why, and rather than sort of worrying about even having the conversation in the first place, and then you end up just doing the strict 9 to 5, which doesn't make much sense because you're not going to be very creative. Any, I suppose, any final advice on, you know, maybe I know you're in a current new role at the moment. Like, is there any advice you give to other product managers you come across in your company about being more effective when it comes to like customer insight or using that, for example?
Again, I think use the resources that you have available. I mean, at the moment, I work in a group with several entities, so everybody and every company can learn from each other, and there's such a wealth of knowledge. It's crazy. But if you're, let's say, a founder, or even if you work for a startup, I would say if you don't feel like in your current role you can do customer insight, if there's really that kind of pushback, then create your own side project. Find something where you can, very much like the Prod MBA, right? You can have a problem hypothesis and actually figure out whether that's the correct problem to solve. And that was super valuable.
I couldn't agree more, because, you know, it's frustrating because people think when it comes to like a side project, they need to, you know, demonstrate something that's got millions of users or millions of like, you know, even companies like Amazon and Google state, you know, we want to just see initiative, like strategic thinking, your process. You know, and also again, they recognize 90% of ideas are going to fail. So if you go, here's what I did and here are all the steps I did, and it was validated as a bad idea, that's still really valuable. And obviously the practice
absolutely
is as well. I think that's a great place to finish off, Antonia. So where should we send people anywhere? I know you write now and again. I know you're on LinkedIn, quite active.
LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me. I think I'm most active there. You can also catch me on Twitter. Very recently joined Clubhouse, because apparently that's the thing to do nowadays.
3 people this week contact me about joining Clubhouse. I'm passing.
But yeah,
stay focused. But anyway, no. Well, look, I'll post your LinkedIn somewhere to follow.
amazing.
We'll also post about Clubhouse on there if you're doing any events. So we'll do that. Sure. We'll send that out with the links. And yeah, as always, a pleasure. And looking forward to putting this live in a few weeks.
Amazing. Thank you so much.